Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Virtual GEM workshop. So today we are opening a great workshop celebrating 30 years from GEM anniversary. And in preparation for it, we have collected photos, videos. We have started also a new logo design, and we have prepared several special sessions. The first one will be just after these brief remarks, and then we will continue throughout the week to discuss GEM future and beyond. So this will also help with the preparation of the Decadal survey. We have several sessions dedicated on that and more discussions on Thursday. We have also formed a diversity, equity, and inclusion subcommittee and started some new initiative I will describe briefly. And also, I would like to remind you that we have adopted an anti-harassment policy that you can read about on the GEM wiki. And please be respectful to each other in the discussion. So this year has been very difficult, not only for GEM, but also for the entire world. And we have lost several dear colleagues and friends. So we have established the Sam Bingham Community Care Initiative. And also we have started a new in memoriam section in the gemstone where you could share remarks about those that we have lost to remember them. We also continue the discussions on the support each other channel. Also, we have started a new mentor-mentee program this year. We have more than 30 mentors in it and 23 mentees, and we hope that this program will grow over the years. So here are the voting members of the GEM Steering Committee. They have been working really hard over the past year to make this workshop happen. A few changes I would like to add and welcome Adam Kellerman as the new vice chair or chair-elect for the GEM steering committee and Ian Cohen as the new at-large member. Also, 3 research area coordinators will have ending terms this year, Seth, Claude Pierre, Martina Gkioulidou, and Shin Otani. So we will be replacing them in the fall. And I would like to thank all of them for their outstanding service to the community. We have 11 active focus groups right now that have organized, the focus group leaders have organized all the splinter sessions in the afternoon. And again, to note is that we have 3 focus groups that are ending, highlighted here in yellow on top of the screen. So there will be a call for new focus groups in the fall. And I would like to thank our GEM program director for the great support and help, Lisa Winter, as well as our steering committee liaison members that established the connection with other agencies and international organizations. And to note that Jesse Woodruff has replaced Mona Kessel, and Andrew Dimok has replaced Benoit Lavro, and we have a new liaison with Rastater for the Metrics and Validation Resource Group. Welcome all. Few notes about GEM this year. We have more than 500 participants registered and more than 200 students and 140 posters submitted. Also, for applications for family care, you can still apply. We have started new platform besides the VGEM.org that we are using right now, the Gather Town. And here on the right-hand side, you see the GEM lobby and the poster hall. and there will be 2 students at the virtual desk in those rooms that you may contact in case you have any problems or questions. And we will continue the discussions via Slack. Please join the Slack workspace if you haven't yet. And finally, as I mentioned, we have a contest for a new GEM logo design. We have received 17 designs, and the steering committee pre-selected the top 3 shown here on this slide. So please go to the gemworkshop.org to find the Google form where you can vote for your favorite design, and we will be announcing the winning design on Friday. Look forward to that. So with this, I would like to announce GEM open. Here is the official GEM bell, and I will stop sharing my screen and pass it to Matt and Martina for the next session.
Hello, I think we lost Matt.
All righty, good morning, everyone. No, you didn't lose me. I just had to get myself together. Good morning and welcome to GEM 2021. The host asked me, okay. Welcome to GEM 2021. This is a panel discussion, so if everyone could please put questions to the panelists in the Q&A section. Martina and I will be looking at that and asking the panelists questions as the session goes on. There is an upvote feature, so please take a moment and read through the questions, and if you see something that's very similar to your question, please upvote it so that we can answer as many people's questions as we can. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists for their introductions.
Is it my turn?
Sure, Lou, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is the first presentation here. Some comments on GEM's history. I was asked to speak to GEM's beginnings and how it sort of evolved for the first few years until it became formalized within the National Science Foundation. So these are some comments on GEM's history from my perspective, and also the perspective that Juan Roeder recorded in EOS back in 1988. Next slide, please. I think it's useful to have some snippets of relevant precursors to GEM, some key points that I think, this is again myself, think preceded GEM and fostered some of the early work in solar terrestrial research. So I start with the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts there in 1958. And in 1977, the studies of the radiation belts and radiation and all was very active in NASA after the discovery of the belts. But it wasn't until about 77 that Noel Hinners, who was then associate administrator for the science directorate at NASA, created within NASA the Solar Terrestrial Division. And that's now the Heliophysics Division. It's gone through a couple of different names. Noel subsequently became director of Goddard Space Flight Center, director of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and retired from Lockheed Martin quite a few years ago, and is now passed away. In 1978, then, after the creation of the Solar Terrestrial Division, NASA sponsored a National Academy study called Space Plasma Physics, which was chaired by Sterling Colgate. And among that, there were four of us from the solar terrestrial community: Charlie Kennel, Gene Parker, Randy Jacopi, and myself. And there were 4 eminent United States plasma physicists: Mal Rudderman, Harold Firth, David Pines, and Marshall Rosenbluth. This resulted in a report to NASA, which was also used by NSF, and a 3-volume book called Space Plasma Physics, which was edited by Charlie Kennel, myself, and Gene Parker. And then after that, in 1979 and beyond, it was the beginning of a NASA Solar Terrestrial Theory program. I don't think that exists any longer, but it existed for quite a length of time as a separate program. And there was some significant growth in NASA and NSF of solar terrestrial research. And in 1986, in September of 1986, there was a meeting with the NSF director and assistant director for geosciences, which evolved then into GEM. Next slide. The background of this, Juan Roeder, who's living now in a retirement home in Denver, Colorado, published a paper in EOS that described the meeting that we had with Block and all, and the beginnings of GEM. In 1986, in September, there was a meeting with the NSF director and assistant director for geosciences. The director at that time was Eric Block. He had retired from IBM. He was a computer hardware pioneer, member of the National Academy of Engineering. The assistant director for geosciences at that time was an oceanographer, William Merrill, Texas A&M, and he's subsequently had very eminent leadership positions in Texas A&M over the years. Juan Roeder was the director of the Geophysical Institute of the University of Alaska. And then members were Tom Cremegis of Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, myself of Bell Laboratories, and George Reed of NOAA. And these group was purposely put together to have academia, industry, and government discuss with the federal government and the NSF the importance of academia, industry, and government, the importance of solar terrestrial research for all those three elements of national importance and interest. Some of the key messages that were conveyed to Block and Merrill at that meeting. I should say that Roeder and Block got along quite well. They both spoke German. Block was a refugee from Germany. Roeder was also a refugee from Germany through Argentina and then into the United States. They got along very well. They spoke German. They had a lot of background similarities in many ways. The messages conveyed were the medium in which the Earth orbiting systems operate is hostile. And of course, that's where industry and some of my interests and what paying my salary at that time. The need to predict weather and climate in geospace is becoming as important as the need to predict weather and climate in the inhospitable regions on Earth into which industrial activity has moved during the last decades. That was really targeted to Block and his understandings of industry in the US, and industry had moved into inhospitable regions at times, and we had to understand terrestrial weather and climate there, and we have to understand that in space as well. And by its very nature, solar terrestrial research is firmly rooted in astrophysics at the upper end, in atmospheric physics and chemistry at the lower end, and in space plasma physics in between. And the atmospheric physics and chemistry at the lower end was represented by George Reed at NOAA, who died quite a number of years ago. Space plasma physics in between, which is myself and Tom Cremegis, and astrophysics at the upper end. None of us were representing that, but we had a fair amount of knowledge, particularly Cremegis and myself, and we could discuss that intelligently. Next slide, please. So we proposed at that meeting that aspects of solar terrestrial research relevant to the total Earth system be incorporated as integral components of the geosciences program. That was not the case at that time as an integral component. Bill Merrill, who was in charge of all of geosciences, was enthusiastic and he encouraged an initiative. A proposal was submitted to the Division of Atmospheric Sciences for support of the organization of a consultative process, and consultative, I want to emphasize that, to develop a consensus for the formulation of a program of solar terrestrial research and proposing a workshop. The proposal was funded by the existing solar terrestrial program at that time under the Atmospheric Sciences Division. It was only one area of NSF at that time, not the multiple areas now that exist under Lisa Winter. The PI for the proposal was Juan Roeder because it was a way to really handle that in an expeditious fashion. So there was a first workshop in Seattle, University of Washington, with 45 participants to try to kick off this proposal, this activity. And then there were subsequent meetings and coordinators. There was a workshop in La Jolla. There was a workshop at the University of Maryland hosted by Ted Rosenberg. The workshop in La Jolla was hosted by Maha Abdur Abshola of UCLA. Maha passed away quite a number of years ago now. They sort of were leading up, and they were pilots, so to speak, of the of how GEM might find itself organized and get itself organized. And as I indicated there, then Maha also had a workshop at the fall '88 AGU fall meeting, which is on magnetopause and boundary layers. All these workshops were organized in order to understand how one might proceed going forward. They were sort of tests of the system, so to speak. Then there was also the major report there, the GEM major report, Geospace Environment Modeling, a program for solar terrestrial research and global geosciences. The next slide, please. This is the last slide here. From the GEM report, and some important points from the GEM report was that GEM should not burden the traditional grant funding mode, which I believe has been maintained by NSF. GEM should not build upon and complement studies carried out in the traditional mode to ensure that one could have exploratory and innovative projects outside a more organized environment. GEM should not compete with simultaneously planned NSF CEDAR initiative, which was already planned and in progress, and the Solar Max program. The Solar Max 91 program, I think, I'm not an authority in this, evolved then into SHINE. And GEM should be carefully coordinated with national and international programs, such as the satellite programs, and those were indicated at that time were NASA, ESA, and ISIS in particular at that time in the late 1980s. And then there's the title page there of Juan Roeder's paper is shown, article there is shown from SPR News in EOS of October, I believe it was, of '88, August '88. And then on the right is the table, the funding requirements for GEM were in the report that was published. And it was hopefully at that time that GEM would start in 1990 after these preliminary workshops, after the understanding of how things might work together. But that was not the case. It took some time for the process to work itself through in NSF, and GEM began in 1991. I do not know the amount of resources that were devoted to GEM at that time. That may be in Bill Lotko's presentation, I'm not sure. But as you can see there, the report published proposed the theory and modeling development, observations and measurements, and data analysis and information systems for GEM. And much of that still exists today. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you today from the distant past. I really appreciate the opportunity that I had to participate in what then has existed for 30 years. It's just amazing. I followed it on and off over the years. I participated on and off at times over the years, and I've been very impressed with how much GEM has contributed to all aspects of the United States and the international interest in solar terrestrial research, from the point of view of academia, from the point of view of government, and from the point of view of industry, where I spent much of my career. So the rest is history. Best wishes for GEM 2021. Thank you, Matt.
No, thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Lou. Matt, before we go for Lou, for those, for maybe the younger students that don't know the legend that you are, do you want to say a couple of words about your path in space physics? Introduce, you went straight to the point, the GEM history.
Oh, well, I don't think, I don't know what, I don't know. I mean, I started out at, I left the graduate school and went to Bell Laboratories to work on the ATS-1 satellite in 1965. ATS-1 was a communication satellite from NASA. It also carried a spin sensing camera for meteorological studies by the University of Wisconsin. And after that, I participated in a number of space programs, by NASA, and also I had logistic support at times with NSF to do measurements in the Antarctic related to communications and space research. And I don't know, I just had a very fortunate career. Amazing in a way. Amazing in a way I'm still around, I guess.
Yes, you are, and you will be. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn it over and introduce our other two panelists.
Hello, my name is Nykyri. I'm currently a professor at the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So today will be my 21st GEM meeting. My first GEM was in 2000 in the Snowmass village when I was a graduate student in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was working with Antonius Otto, who was a fantastic advisor, and it was a very exciting time to be a PhD student. We just had a Geotail mission, and Don Fairfield at NASA, together with Antonius, they had found a very interesting event when doing the northward interplanetary magnetic field. The Geotail observed periodic encounters of sometimes even southward IMF at the Earth's magnetopoles. And so that was kind of like motivated my PhD research. And basically, my area is mostly focused on the plasma entry and transport. So I was very active at the 3 focus groups related to the plasma entry and transport, and also the CUSP focus group, and then the global interactions campaign that was basically led by Dave Sybeck and Tai Fan, and they had the dayside research area as well as the tail area. So during that time, as a grad student, I had an opportunity to participate on those, and it was a very great vehicle as a graduate student to participate. And Snowmass was a great place to communicate with all the scientists. We were all, after the sessions, went to have dinner and were at the Mountain Dragon. So you got to talk with all the big names in the field and play, game of pool. And it was a really welcoming and wonderful environment.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. I'm Bill Lotko. I spent 30-some years as a professor at Dartmouth College. I'm now a senior research associate at the High Altitude Observatory in Boulder. I came into the GEM. I used to like to tell people that I have never missed a GEM meeting except the very first one that Lou talked about. And I came into the GEM program in 1988. I had noticed that I was working at the time on boundary layer problems, and in particular, the magnetosphere-ionosphere coupling of boundary layers. Became very interested in the GEM program and started going to the workshops at that time. One thing I can say about those pre-program workshops, that some of the ones that were organized by George Sisko, you would show up at the meeting and your name would be on the program and you had no idea what you were going to say or what you were going to do. You were leading a session, and it kind of started, I think, the sense of a very spontaneous GEM program. And those early years were very enjoyable for me. And I served, once the program got funding from NSF, served as the steering committee chair at that time. That was starting in 1991.
Thank you, Dr. Lotko. And we're going to go ahead into your slides, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. It's good. I just have 2 slides, and I have a number of remarks that I'll make throughout the talking points here. This slide just picks up where Lou left off to give a sense of how the program was envisioned to be organized originally. And then the next slide is how it was actually implemented and unfolded over the next decade and a half. So originally, the ideas that came out of the workshop that Lou mentioned and was discussed in the article in EOS by Juan Roederer, there were to be 6 phased overlapping science campaigns, And then it's kind of like in engineering, we used to like to say, you know, they have these various groups that do product development, and they throw it over the wall to manufacturing to figure out how to make it. And the program at that time was kind of envisioned to be that way. These 6 science campaigns were to take place, and then this, at the time called the magnetosphere general circulation model, was to be developed based on what was learned in those science campaigns. And at that time, the program was envisioned to have kind of 2 separate organizations, one the theory campaign, and the observing campaigns that were coordinated, but didn't necessarily have overlapping science thrusts. And then you have to remember, all of this happened in many respects pre-internet. I mean, the browsers, Netscape, the pre-Netscape browser didn't exist at that point. And so there was a strong emphasis on how to organize activities, data centers, electronic communications, and so on. And so there was a 3rd component to the program that was envisioned at that time that would address these important issues, kind of hold the program together. Originally, it was envisioned to be funded at about each campaign on the order of $500,000 to $1 million per year, and then ramping up, eventually reaching something like $8 million in the program. How did it actually unfold? Matt, go to the next slide. That figure is from Juan's EOS article. So in 1991, after these several pre-campaign workshops, the first campaign that was to be started was the boundary layer campaign. At that time, it was envisioned that there would be 4 5-year overlapping campaigns sequenced every 2 years, starting up every 2 years with at that time what came to be called the geospace general circulation model, would kind of overlap all of those, run in parallel with synthesis. So it stopped being over the wall, do the science first, and then figure out how to make the model. It was going to happen simultaneously. And so you can see here that the timelines from 91 through 2006, a boundary layer campaign ran for 5 years, tail substorm campaign got a renewal that went on for, I think, 9 years maybe. And then intermagnetosphere and storms campaign also ran for a better part of 10 years. And the magnetosphere-ionosphere coupling campaign, which was to have started 2 years after the intermagnetosphere and storms campaign started, got a late start, and ran for a number of years before things in the program changed. Around 1996, the GGCM synthesis activity actually came to be called a campaign as well. And there was a change from what had been envisioned was sort of an accretion of models into a GGCM, in which the so-called MHD spine models provided a more fruitful way to look at the global system. Funding, it's interesting to look at the funding. So what was actually funded initially was at $300K per year, and eventually ramped up to $500K per year. I think in today's dollars, that's $600K per year and $1 million per year. A big part of that was devoted to the workshop, and I think we all recognize how important the workshop was in those days, and still is. And then there was a little bit of money left over for funding select projects that were competed through the normal NSF competitive proposal process. The one thing I will say, add to what Lou said about the start of this program, it did not tap into core funds of NSF. It was new money. And the reason that new money was let, I think, in large part, was because GEM was fulfilling an unmet national need. And so articulating a goal for a program that would bring in new money, however little or however much it might be, was really important. And I think there's a lesson there to think about for future opportunities for the GEM community. And I think I'll stop there and let Katarina take over. Oh, let me just say one more thing about the research areas. In 2000, things were changing. You can see that the original plans for 5-year campaigns really didn't pan out. And around 2006, there was a realization that business as usual or as originally planned was not working. And at that point, what had been called campaigns were described as research areas, redefined, and with focus groups that would define the problems that would be taken on within those research areas. And although the names have changed and changed a little bit in 2013, that model's been with us ever since. So, Katarina?
Thank you very much, Dr. Lotko. Before we move on to the third section, we do have a couple of audience questions if y'all would like to field those. The first one is from Riley Troyer, says, going forward, do you see GEM continuing indefinitely or evolving into something different?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, I think that the workshops, the GEM workshops, you kind of have a life of their own, almost independently of the program. They serve a much broader need in the research community. The money that goes to the workshop that's provided by NSF is highly leveraged by research programs at NASA, DoD, NOAA, USGS, international, and so on. I think we recognize that the problems we're dealing with are really global in scope and need the international community. So I think the workshop serves a very important role in our community. The GEM program, and I think, this is maybe a talking point for later on, but where's the GEM program going to go in the future as a program, and what are its goals is a bigger topic that we should probably hold off on.
I think we will address that at the end of this third session, the future, so we can come back to that in a discussion. So I was tasked to kind of discuss briefly the GEM participation numbers, and I was able to gather the data nearly over 2 solar cycles. And then I attempted to find out information on the publications pertaining to the GEM research areas as well as campaigns. And of course, there is a strong impact as well on the space missions that occurred, after those discussions at the GEM or during, and so it's sometimes hard to separate the two. So just in 2013, like Bill mentioned, the GEM research areas were reconfigured. So we have here first the solar wind magnetosphere interaction, covering the coupling from the solar wind and the Earth's magnetosphere at the day side, but also the flank boundary, and also low latitudes and high latitude regions. We also have the magnetotail and plasma sheet, the inner magnetosphere, the magnetosphere ionosphere coupling, as well as the global systems modeling. So you can read more details on the GEM white paper that Bill Lotko was leading in 2013 and was asked by Ray Walker to put this team together. So here is some background that was partly discussed earlier. So the vision was really for the GEM is to come up with the accurate prediction of the geospace environment. To develop, the mission is to develop a physical understanding of the large-scale organization and dynamics of the geospace environment from observations, theory, and increasingly realistic models. The mode of operation has been these week-long summer meetings, as well as the one-day mini GEM before the fall HEU. During the early days, the GEM, like mentioned before, were organized in these campaigns that run about until 2003. There was the Global Interactions campaign that kind of overlapped with the creation of the 5 different research areas and several focus groups within these research areas. There's also been a number of different GEM challenges, perhaps the most important one has been the Gem reconnection challenge, which essentially showed the importance of the whole physics, that as long as you include the whole term, you can come up with the same reconnection rate as if you include more kinetic models, which is of course very, very important when we want to build kind of like a global geospace model using available computer resources. There also has been the inner magnetospheric storm challenge, and there's a JGR paper published on this. More recently, there has been a Gem dayside kinetics challenge led by Helio et al. And the special issue has been collecting articles up to 2020. There's been also a ULF modeling challenge, 3D ionospheric electrodynamics challenge, mid-tail modeling challenge, and ionospheric outflow challenge. This slide shows the number of GEM participants, where the blue columns shows the portion of the GEM funded students from 2001 up to 2020. The last column here is the great numbers are because this is the virtual GEM meeting. And the orange one shows all of the participants. So I found information on the GEM NSF supported students. So in the early years, it was roughly about 1/4, and here about 1/5 of the participants. And then it has been increasing to be about 1/3 to 1/4 about the total participants is supported by the NSF. However, these numbers also include some students who are not supported by the NSF. So, but I think basically the message to take from here is that the NSF supported student funding has pretty much stayed the same and not increased at the rate as the total participation over the years. So when I started to do this keyword search for the different GEM research areas, there's of course an infinite parameter space to go about that. So I tried to first look at the processes and consequences, and sometimes these two are kind of like a chicken and an egg problem. For example, the pressure pulses that hit the Earth's magnetopause, those are created somewhere between the sun and the Earth's magnetosphere. So sometimes you have what are the processes for the Earth's system. There can be consequences for the solar wind. So, and the other example is the turbulence. So turbulence can be created by the physical processes, but it can also be a mechanism itself that then results into the heating and so forth. So I did some specific keyword searches, and then because we have a finite time, I thought, well, maybe I will here present the GEM campaign-based search results to try to see what is the impact of the GEM for the publications in the geospace field, but also try to put them in the context of the simultaneous space missions. So this is just a reminder of these different campaigns that we have. So I use the ADS system, and this here shows the keyword search that I made. So for the boundary layers using this, we received 95,000 results from the beginning of the space age up to the present day. And on the right-hand side, you can see the concept cloud where I basically put 50% emphasis on the frequency and 50% on the uniqueness of the particular word. To try to disentangle what might produce certain increases here, just to remind that the GEM boundary layer campaign occurred in 91 to 96. So kind of like covering this area here. There was also Gkioulidou spacecraft launched in 1992, which provided very important data on the boundary layers. The Polar launch happened in 1996 that provided very excellent measurements at the high altitude region of the Earth's magnetosphere. In 96, there was also the cluster 1 failure. And then luckily the Europeans, they got cluster renewed, and then the cluster 2 launch was in 2000. In year 2000, we also had the boundary layer conference in New Orleans that resulted in this book. But I think GEM has had like a very important impact on our field in kind of like bringing people together, starting discussing ideas, and then it leads into the follow-up activities in terms of the Chapman conferences and HEU sessions. For the magnetospheric and storms, there's a lot of results, and so 16,934. And you can here again see there's a very rapid gradient here both in the refereed publications and non-refereed here during this time when the GEM started. There also was various space missions launched. We had a cluster. Then here you can see later very clearly the TEMIs as well as the Van Allen probes coming in. For the tail and substorm field, again, you can see a very strong increase here from the 1992 to 1997, and then they're increasing forward. So again, with the geotail launch, there was tail and substorm campaigns within GEM continuing until 2003. There was the cluster, and most importantly, the TEMIS launch in 2007. That was basically, meant to resolve the substorm question, and I think it has. And then later on, we have an excellent opportunity to do conjunction studies with the MMS and TEMIS and go into the details of the formation on the thin current sheets and various instabilities and wave particle interactions that occur. For the magnetosphere ionosphere coupling certs, again, you can see a very strong increase from the 87 to this 1992. And this is, again, we had the GEM campaign on the MI coupling here. We had a number of space missions, their polar cluster, also FAST, which I don't mention here. And then also later the TEMIS, and the TEMIS ground-based magnetometers network also has been very crucial in helping to put together this global geospace response, both on the day-side driving as well as on the magnetotail dynamics when you get reconnection and resulting flows into the ionosphere and to the and when you see the various VI2 pulsations in the ground magnetometers. Here's an example of the GEM challenge, the GEM reconnection challenge, which is published in the Geophysical Research Letter led by Joachim Bern. So this has received 911 results. So 911 publications have cited this article, and you can see that mostly refereed articles. In the previous section, you saw that there was at a certain point lots of increase in the non-published articles as well, probably because our field wants to travel to the conferences, so we have all the HCU abstracts included there as well. So when we look at the these different GEM research areas, one can also do the region-based search, and I will just go through this rather quickly. So we, for the solar wind magnetosphere interaction, if we put the regions here, the bow shock, fore shock, magnetosheet, magnetopause, we get a very rapid increase here steadily, and you can see here in the non-refereed publications, and a step-by-step increase also here in the refereed publications. I would like to specifically highlight a very important GEM contribution, which is really this the foreshock phenomena and all these dayside kinetics, kinetic physics that plays role at the foreshock, and how that travels through the magnetosheet and has an impact on the magnetopause reconnection, and that can produce ground-based oscillations and also potentially clear auroral signatures. So this is kind of like a unique new research area that I think brought together several modelers, Nikomidi and Yulin from the Open University, and people looking at this impact of the on the dayside kinetics on the global system. So there's a slew of various physical processes such as hot flow anomalies, magnetosheet jets, foreshock habitons, and so forth. So this to me is a very exciting example that was really led, I think, by the GEM community. If we do the tail-based research using the words plasma sheet, tail lobe, flank magnetopause, again, you can see here very rapid increase in the recent years. So as it should be, since our field is growing, there is no wonder that number of publications is increasing when the years go past. And finally, here we have the inner magnetospheric based search with the keywords ring current, plasma sphere, plasma pulse, or radiation belts. And here again, you can see this impact on the various space missions, cluster TEMIS, Van Allen probes, and the MMS. As a conclusion, I would like to recap that the amount of GEM supported students has not increased at the rate proportional to the overall participation. In citation search, the GEM research with the GEM research keywords, it's not easy to pinpoint solely the GEM impact from the mission impact and the general increase of citations over the time. However, the impact is more clear when looking citations related to the specific GEM challenges, for example, the GEM reconnection challenge and campaigns. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that the GEM is a very important forum for discussing geospace science, identifying open questions in the field, and leading the research direction and missions of the magnetospheric community.
Very nice. Thank you, Katarina. Amazing, amazing job collecting all this data. So I think my participation in this session is asking this million-dollar question. Does GEM have, and it's similar to the question I think that Riley asked earlier, does GEM have a unifying vision in its current configuration? Yes or no? And if not, or if yes, how do we move forward? And whoever wants to jump to ask this question.
Well, I'll start.
Go ahead, yeah.
So in the white paper that Katarina mentioned, the vision and mission of GEM is very clearly articulated. I'll just read it. I think it was on Katarina's slides. Vision, accurate prediction of the geospace environment. You know, we often say in proposals, the objective is to understand, but you can't really demonstrate that you understand something if you can't predict it. And so I think it's very important for GEM to have this as a vision. And then the mission, one level down, more specific, develop physical understanding of the large-scale organization and dynamics of the geospace environment from observations, theory, and increasingly realistic models. These are fantastic goals for the program. I'll be frank, I don't think the program actually is meeting these goals very well. I think everybody has these ideas in the back of their mind, but at the level of at the organization of the program, I don't see how these things are actually coming together in sort of the grand unified vision that was originally articulated for GEM. So there's the sort of the ideal and there's the reality of it. So anyway, that's my view.
So if I may add, I think what I would personally like to see is that since we have now this mode of operation within these focus groups under the certain research areas, that little bit is like, you know, breaking this geospace into pieces. And we have this global modeling aspect, which to some extent takes care of that. But I would like to see GEM moving into the model where it would be about 50-50, where the 50% effort versus the summer meeting time is occurring in the focus group mode, which could be like a 5-year term. And then I really enjoyed the concept of these campaigns that would, you know, involve at least 2 GEM research areas or Shine or CEDAR. And this could be like a 50% of the GEM modality. And the several teams participating on these campaigns spanning these different research areas could apply for the NSF GEM funding to support PhD student stipends, fostering student visits at the different participating institutions, as well as some travel support for the team and even up to perhaps 1 month research effort for the participating people. So I think that these kind of campaigns would help the GEM community to focus on the system level science questions and identify space-based and ground-based measurement platform needs that are required to answer these outstanding questions. And going forward, NSF has this new mid-scale 1 and 2 opportunity. So I think as a community, it would be very important for us to really think, you know, system level, you know, what are the platforms, ground-based and space-based, that we need to answer these system level questions, and then organize ourselves into groups and try to go after those resources, perhaps using the mid-scale line.
Yes, thanks, Katarina. Very good point. So I think we can move on to some questions that the audience has asked. I see. So I'm starting with the upvote, the most popular questions, and I'll move down the order. So Hyunju asked, and maybe I think it's relevant, although it doesn't seem GEM like, but I think it's very relevant for our field. Would you tell me how important the Decadal survey would be? How survey would impact our future science? I found difficult to motivate myself for writing a white paper. So I think that speaks for all of us, maybe the younger ones, at least. So if any words of advice?
Well, I can't give any words of advice, but I was the chair of the first decadal survey back in 2002 or so. And at that time, we didn't have white papers because we didn't have the same kind of internet connections and all these kinds of things that we have now. So we made an effort at that time to try to go to meetings from including GEM, including Shine, including CEDAR and AGU meetings, and ask people for inputs and ask them to write for us if they could. And I found those kinds of inputs that we got from the community very valuable for the thinking of the Decadal Survey Committee at that time. So from my perspective, that the white papers we solicit, so-called white papers, I don't know whether we called them that at that time, they were very, they were important to give a background and a foreground and a future ground of what the community was thinking. Now, you know, it's 20 odd years later, whether that's the same, I don't know, but I will tell you that it was important for us in the first decadal.
To hear from the community. So I think that's the way that the Decadal, the committee hears from the community via white paper. So I would say it's important. So Mary Hudson then, she's asking, how was funding kept up with growth of GEM? My sense is it has not, that the original goals are very ambitious relative to the funding level. Any comments on that?
Well, GEM started out underfunded. Maybe that's not the right term, but relative to the original idea, it was underfunded by a very large margin initially. And I think we looked at the funding that we got in those early days as what I called birdseed money. You know, it wasn't even seed funding; it was birdseed funding to get things going. And GEM, you know, GEM has always been very highly leveraged, both with our international partners and interagency partners. And it's important to keep that in mind. I'm not sure, you know, so GEM has been going for so long. Is it really, are we going to be able to bring new money into the program without a really new initiative? And I think the way of the future is, what are those new initiatives? What are the unmet national needs that this community can address and articulate up the chain at NSF and beyond?
Mm-hmm.
For example, space weather was one of those that came out of the 90s and is still with us, but sorry to interrupt, Martina.
No, it's fine. Okay, the next question is by Emil adds, in my opinion, GEM is a very collaborative community. Why do you think we are so collaborative when compared to other competitive research areas? And the mention chemistry, bioengineering, etc. Any feeling why we are so collaborative and such nice people in our community?
We started organizing conferences in nice places that are not too big. You can't escape, so you are there stuck with the mountain dragon. So you know, you sort out all the problems and play pool, and I think that is, I mean, well, from the student point of view, that to me was a really important thing about GEM. So I think if you start having these conferences in a too big enough of a place, like some of these chemistry and so forth conferences are.
It's a bigger field. Yeah,
I think their own ways, and if you are low sole student over there, you might be feeling left alone, and you don't, have a chance to interact with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I would say simply, we're dealing with a global problem, and no one scientist or group of scientists can address this problem without collaboration. It's just the nature of the field forces it.
That's so true. Yes. Yeah. Okay, and I think maybe one last question, if he can put it in. Building on Bill's, it's by anonymous attendee. Building on Bill's comment about not meeting the goals of GEM. Should GEM still be focused on building a GGCM? Is that really what our community needs to be focused on? Scandalous question. Scandalous.
I mean, we could, you can torque that around. I mean, it started out as MGCM, then it became GGCM, then it became Global System Modeling. So, there are different names for the same thing, but I'll just come back to a comment I made earlier. You can say, I understand, and is my understanding the same as your understanding? But until you can predict it, you cannot demonstrate that you understand something. And that requires a model backed up by observations and validated by observations and so on. So anyway, that's one perspective.
The other thing I would like to add is that we can't still think magnetosphere as its own entity. So in a sense that when we, for example, do statistical studies of the magnetospheric and magnetosheet properties, we still have a problem that very often we organize the data based on the single point at the L1. So we really have a multi-scale structure in the solar wind, and everything that happens in the magnetosphere is subject to that. And the very difficult thing is that when you have scale sizes in the solar wind that are of the order of the magnetospheric scale length of about 40 Earth radii. So now when we, for example, consider the statistically most typical interplanetary magnetic field direction, the Parker spiral, then we expect to have, okay, in the dawn sector, we have a quasi-parallel shock. So in the dusk sector, we have a quasi-perpendicular shock. Well, now if you actually have multiple spacecraft, you can unravel some of these structures in the solar wind. So you could have situations where you have actually two quasi-parallel shocks occurring in the dawn and dusk, or two quasi-perpendicular because of this magnetospheric structure. So that would actually put sometimes our statistical studies, they would have uncertainty what's actually happening. So my point is that we would need to, going future, it's the geospace system, we need to have multi-point measurements in the solar wind, but also in the magnetosphere. The other impact is the global imaging of the magnetosphere solar wind system would be very interesting and important going forward. Like in the early days, we had these barium release studies. So that would be just so neat to have a system where we are globally viewing, like SMILE missions or similar missions like that are coming up, to have a global image of the magnetosphere, and we could simultaneously release some substance, barium or something, and see it and follow the mass flow all the way from the wind in the different regions and trace that in a system. And finally, the fundamental goal before we can predict, we need to understand. So the comparative magnetospheres are very important. I think we really should visit planet Jupiter with more than one spacecraft at a time to really understand the acceleration of the energetic particles, and then bring that home to our GEM community and maybe have a vehicle in a GEM to address this, because I feel like sometimes this magnetospheric physics in the planetary community is a little bit overlooked.
I agree. So there are lots of questions coming in, and some of them are really provocative, and I want to ask them, but I think we ran out of time. Is that true, Vania?
Yes.
Okay. I'll stop here. I will move the questions to Slack, and we can continue the discussion there.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Very nice questions and discussions, and let's continue on Slack because we have time constraints with our next speakers. So let's continue with our next session. So Ian, Cohen, and you, Zheng, are the moderator. Please take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Vania. Welcome, everybody. We are going to shift a little bit, and I think that last session keyed us up very nicely for our next topic about the Heliophysics 2050 workshop and preparation for the upcoming decadal survey. We do have quite a few presenters here. It's going to be a little bit fast so that we can get it in the session. I apologize in advance for that to both the attendees and to the presenters, but I appreciate and hopefully ask for everyone's succinctness in their presentations. So our overview, our purpose here is just to debrief from the Heliophysics 2050 workshop that happened a few weeks ago. Hopefully everyone knows about that workshop. We're going to hear some expectations from the agencies and the national academies on what they expected for the upcoming decadal survey. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how we'll prepare throughout the week of GEM for what the magnetospheric, the GEM community is going to do as far as input. We heard about white papers a little earlier for the decadal. Here's the agenda. We've got 3 members of the Science Organizing Committee from the Helio 2050 workshop. We have Maura Hagan from the National Academies Committee for Solar and Space Physics. And then we have 3 agency representatives from NOAA, NASA, and NSF respectively. And so we're just going to, because of time constraints, we're going to jump right into it. And I'm going to ask Shasha Zou, one of the co-chairs from the Helio 2050 Science Organizing Committee, to take it away.
Thank you, Ian. Is my voice coming out okay? Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity of giving you a very brief report about the workshop. Next slide. This workshop was initiated and supported by our NASA headquarters Heliophysics division. In particular, Jared is here as a representative of the NASA organizers. And I was very grateful to collaborate with Sabrina as co-chairs of this organizing committee and several other members from actually very different areas in our heliophysics communities to make this a great event. Next slide. And so very brief about the purpose and the scope of this workshop. So the goal was to increase the community involvement in the decadal review process, right? And we want the community to think bigger and longer, not just to focus our eyes in the next 10 years, but think about what does our heliophysics look like in 2050 and what do we do in the next decade to help us get there, right? So the workshop itself was trying to enable discussions within and also across our heliophysics disciplines, beyond our traditional gem, cedar, and shine boundaries. And then we want to encourage the focus on science questions and the health of the program and the community, and not talking about or focusing on the implementation. Next slide. And so we had a huge crowd showing up, more than 1,100 registered participants. And then we had 13 live sessions, and most of the sessions had about 200 or 300 participants during the live session, and not including those ones who later looked at the recording. The most relevant sessions to GEM is, of course, the first is the magnetosphere session, and also there were ITM sessions, space weather, and then 2 very unique sessions, expanding the frontiers. So this session was designed to encourage us to think about the knowledges that we gain for the geospace system. How can we apply them to the bigger pictures, to the other planets, the moons in our solar system, or even beyond the solar system, to the exoplanet system, right? The last session was also a very unique session called Heliophysics as a Community in 2050. Next slide. In this session, we discussed several very important topics, but usually we couldn't find a good place to discuss them, right? How do we encourage collaborations and unite the whole field, and how do we break the boundaries of the different disciplines? And there, we also had the opportunity of talk about how to make our community more inclusive. And we had a special panel focusing on DEI-AJ, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We also had the opportunity discussing the mental health in academia, which was a very important topic, and we get very emotional during the discussions. And I was very glad to see that we have a session here in GEM workshop specifically devoted to focusing on mental health, especially during this very difficult pandemic time. Next slide. And so that was about the Helio Physics workshop itself. And I know that was a very quick summary. But in the next several months, we plan to continue support the post-workshop groups. And Jerry is here. Jerry will chime in and talk more about that. And the Slack workspace will remain open until the Decadal survey kick out. And you can find all the session discussions and the summaries in the Slack channels. All the questions and the discussions were saved there. And today we also have our representatives from the National Academy and from the various agencies. And so I will leave those perspectives and, to them. So very quickly, 3 slides about the resources that you can use. The post-workshop, some of you may have already received emails coming from Ian because you were the pre-workshop discussion group leaders. And then there were also opportunities to continue this. And so we call them post groups. So I think Jerry will talk more about this. Next slide. Okay, next one. Okay, some useful resources for white paper preparation. NASA is hosting the Decadal overview webpage for the agencies, so you can go back and check very frequently for any updates. You can also publicize your ideas and coordinate with others using those websites. The goal here is to make sure that we don't leave a hole in our Decadal survey, right? If you think that one of the research areas is very important and should be emphasized, and this is your opportunity to express your ideas. Next one. So NASA is also supporting the mission concept studies as Decadal survey input, including the solar terrestrial probes and the living with a star. So both Jerry and Simon as a point of contact for those 2 programs. Next one. Okay. We can also look at our neighbor communities, right? The Planetary Science and Astro also have had their white papers publicly available, and you can take a look to see how they are organizing their community. There was a midterm assessment report and also the Decadal survey lessons learned and best practices based on the previous Decadal survey. So for younger folks and mid-career folks, if you are not familiar with the Decadal survey, and those would be very nice resources for you to get started. Okay, the last one. I believe the last one. Oops, yeah. So please capitalize on your momentum, and when you think about writing the white papers, and please make sure to be inclusive and reach out to early and mid-career folks, and then think big. Okay, so that's all from me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shasha. Next, we're going to hear from Chen, who is one of the co-chairs for the magnetosphere session and a member of the SOC for Helio 2050. Chen, are you there on?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you to Ian, Yihua, and other GEM organizers for bringing us together. It's amazing that we're here in this virtual space on this planet, which so far seems to be still the only place in the heliosphere where life has evolved in such intelligent forms as to discuss decadal surveys and chart exploration path forward. I will share a few points or dreams that are most relevant to the GEM community. The science ones are easier, they go first. The human ones are more important, they go last. First, to build a critical knowledge base and validate modeling for geospace. Constant monitoring of conditions just upstream of the bow shock, at the bow shock, magneto sheath, magnetopause, dayside and night-side magnetosphere are necessary. This monitor should ideally include an imaging element to provide a global view of the magnetosphere. Constant monitoring means that the measurements are available at all times. L1 monitors are great for forecasting. However, the upstream conditions measured at L1 often differ substantially from those directly impact the geospace. This monitoring will provide critical support to the magnetosphere multi-scale constellations, such as METCOM put forth by Larry Kepko et al., to provide in-depth measurements for key regions, including candidate substorm onset regions. Next is something I called self-inflicted space weather. Even when the solar wind and IMF are steady without any variations, kinetic instabilities stirred up by shock reflected ions interacting with the incoming solar wind can generate Earth-sized intense magnetic field and density enhancements. This has been shown by existing missions such as MMS. Yet the impact of these huge intense structures on the magnetosphere is to be established. Global hybrid simulations predict that these structures can impact the day-side magnetosphere by inducing magnetopause reconnection and indentation, and hence have the potential to lead to day-side escape of planet origin plasmas. This connects to what Ian has been advocating, comparative magnetospheres, mentioned also by Katarina today. For example, at Mars, this process of self-inflicted space weather may be critical to account for how Mars loses its atmosphere. A common outstanding problem shared by many sessions in Helio 2050 is particle acceleration. This topic is at the core of quite a few GEM focus groups. Most theory and simulations do not consider the feedback of accelerated particles to the system. As Joe Gkioulidou pointed out, self-consistently treating the accelerated particles as part of the contributors to the collective fields that accelerate them is necessary, especially when accelerated particles are no longer tiny minorities. This presents a major challenge in computation. Indeed, both self-inflicted space weather and self-consistent treatment of particle acceleration require large-scale simulations that are beyond the current computation capacities. Of all the agencies, DOE is the one that is leading the nation's supercomputing development. The exascale computing project, for example. Close collaborations between NASA, NSF, and DOE will be huge to enable global modeling of geospace and the heliosphere that has built-in kinetic physics and covers multi-scales. My last point concerns cultivating future generations. We are never too young, too old, or too odd to contribute to this. Regarding the Decadal survey, early career and minority scientists, you are especially encouraged to lean in, to organize Decadal survey discussion groups, to lead or contribute to white papers, to celebrate who you are, what you know and don't know with all of us. There is funding to support your efforts in organizing a Decadal survey discussion group. Please contact Ian if you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Li Jian. Next, we're going to move on to Larry Kepko, the other co-chair for the magnetosphere session at Helio 2050. Larry, you want to take it away?
Yep, thanks, Ian. So I found two themes that emerged from the Helio 2050 workshop and the pre-meetings that we held. And that was the concept of a system of systems, and the magnetosphere is a system of systems. And then mesoscales. Mesoscales showed up a lot at Helio 2050, not just in geospace, but also in the solar wind, going down into the middle corona, and also in ITM. Mesoscales appear to be a unifying physics for heliophysics going forward for the next few decades. So next slide. So you're probably all overly familiar with this allegory of 6 blindfolded scientists trying to study an elephant. I won't go into detail. Go to the next slide, please. This really isn't applicable to us because we all know we're studying the elephant. We know what the magnetosphere is. We're studying the magnetosphere. And we're not blindfolded. We've been studying in situ, at least, for 60 years with the world's best instrumentation. So this is the wrong allegory, but let's carry it forward a little bit further. Next slide. The issue is this. The elephant, like all living things, like the magnetosphere, is a system of systems. The systems work together to create something that's more complex than just the simple addition of their parts. And we often study these systems in isolation with very advanced microscopes, and we're missing the big picture. So if you look at something like Van Allen probes, which made tremendous advancements on particle acceleration, but the question is, what was happening at the outer boundary? Were the particles that were coming in highly structured temporally and spatially? Probably. You had to rely either on guessing, or maybe if you had a chance projection of Themis, you might see it. So you're missing some important context there. In the same way, Themis, tremendous science, but was narrowly tailored to a 1D question, inside out, outside in, when in fact the tail, even in its simplest, is a complex 2D structure, but really it's a 3D structure with off-factorial aspects that are important for some questions. And then after studying all these pieces in isolation, we try to piece them together into the entire system. To the next slide. And you end up with something like this. I guess that looks like an elephant, right? But there are gaps because it's rare to see the system as a whole. And we've studied the subsystems in isolation. So after you get the system together, you say, well, why did that tail flap? Did the eye see something? Did the ears hear something? We don't know. We've measured the amplitude of the tail flapping to extreme precision, the fundamental frequency, the tail length distribution, and so on. But why did it move at that particular time in that particular way? And to answer questions like that, you need to know how the systems link together and what are the pathways and conduits for information exchange. And we're missing those pieces when we study the manuscript for the most part. Next, please. Now, in biological systems, there are all sorts of pathways, right? There's the muscular, nervous, respiratory system. Here's the nervous system, for example. These are the pathways by which energy and information are transmitted across the entire system. In Earth's magnetosphere, these pathways are alpha waves, electric fields, particle motion, convection, and so on. And often these pathways occur at mesoscales, say 1 to 3 RE type fundamental units, dayside magnetopause, BBFs in the tail, and so on. Well, studying mesoscales is actually very difficult because you need decent spatial and temporal resolution to see how the mesoscales evolve and couple from the micro, which you study really, really well with things like Van Allen probes and MES, to the global, where we study statistically, or sometimes we get imaging like polar, and then back again, because that coupling is two-way. Simulating mesoscales is also hard for exactly the same reason, because you need high spatial and temporal resolution. There's a large gap between micro and global. I think that's where the next 30 years of research is going to be, that I heard from Helio 2050. Next, please. All right, so this, how to make progress. Even before Helio 2050 was finished, the facilitators and the scene setters were already emailing each other about how to continue the momentum that was built at Helio 2050 and before, and kind of assemble all the ideas into a coherent concept. We put together on the left this hub and spoke concept. Geospace is a system of systems. All right, that's the main white paper, so to speak, or main concept that organizes. And then beyond that, we have 4 spokes that go off: trapped region, or magnetosphere, the boundary, the ITM system, and the Dengti cycle, which you can think of as the tail for simplicity. This hub and spoke isn't new. GEM implicitly organizes around this concept. And 30 years ago, this was probably a lot more explicit, with the GGCM acting as a unifier. And Bill did a really nice job of explaining how that worked before. I think Bill Lotko also made a very important point that GEM at the time filled an important program gap. In fact, I think it helped define that gap. And as we look forward to Helio 2050 and the upcoming decadal survey, GEM should really think about what gaps exist, because there are gaps, and how these gaps might grow over the next 30 years, and whether GEM should step in and fill those gaps. I think that'd be a really nice thing for GEM to do, to make GEM extremely relevant to the next 30 years. In terms of initiatives, we came up with 4. One is resolve the mesoscales. I think that should hopefully be pretty obvious to the GEM community. We require, in many cases, constellations and simultaneous imaging, so you can make that connection between what you see remotely and in situ. Measure the state parameters. You can think of this as measuring magnetosphere's vital signs, pulse ox, pulse rate, things like that. You can come up with a whole list of them: L1 measurements or upstream solar wind measurements, open flux, field line current intensities, and so on. It's important to have those if you're trying to understand how the systems communicate to each other. We also need to continue developing advanced numerical modeling with a focus on the mesoscale dynamics. You're starting to see a lot of that with Gamera. There's still a lot more work to be done. And then finally, it's really important, and GEM does this really well, which is validate the models and benchmark scientific advancements to move from the qualitative to the quantitative. And this initiative, this action, really links actions 1 through 3. We also need to tightly integrate ground-based, space-based, and numerical modeling in a whole of system approach. GEM ostensibly does this, but there's probably a lot more we can do and do a better job at that. I think going forward, we need to have this whole of system approach. The effort should be broad-based and diverse, taking advantage of emerging expertise, machine learning, AI, so on, and international in scope. I'll again point out, as you heard before, that GEM formed when ISTP formed. And it's hard to overstate the importance of GEM for realizing the value, scientific value of ISTP. They really went hand in hand. And I think we'll see something similar. Hopefully we'll see something similar, I'll say it that way. Hopefully we'll see something similar, international collaboration. The magnetosphere is too large to study with a single agency, particularly when you get into the mesoscale. So I think this international collaboration is going to be very important for the next few decades. And then finally, I'm going to say, don't break down the silos of expertise. Experts are experts. We want the experts involved. We want to keep that expertise. What we need is to gather all the expertise under a large research effort with a shared vision. And GEM provides some of that, but the drive centers and the ISFMs at the centers are really good examples to follow. And I think we're seeing great science from those when the drive centers are implemented. GEM, I would say, plus CDAR and SHINE, ancillary to GEM, is a natural group to advance this concept for the decadal survey. Assuming that's the direction we as a community want to go, and that's really up to the community. This is what I had heard, I think, from the community. So I look forward to working with the community on this. Right, that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Larry. We're going to move on now to Maura Hagan, who is one of the co-chairs of the Committee of Solar and Space Physics at the National Academy. So please go ahead, Maura.
Well, it's my pleasure. Yes.
Yep,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
It's my pleasure to represent the people who are really actually doing the planning work at the National Academies, and that's Art Charo and Abigail Sheffer, who couldn't be with us today. Next slide, please. So what is a decadal survey? For those of you who are new to the process, it provides a community-based assessment of the state of the knowledge in the field, and it includes recommendations and priorities for government investment for the following 10 years. It takes into account research and technology infrastructure, interagency coordination, international cooperation, just to build upon a comment that we just heard from Larry. And it also includes recommendations for the state of the profession and the health of the enterprise. And notably, this decadal survey efforts were mandated by the NASA Authorization Acts of 2005 and 2008. Next slide, please. So the previous decadal survey was published in 2013, and it's entitled Solar and Space Physics, a Science for a Technological Society. The backup slides in this presentation summarize the assessments, recommendations, and priorities, and it's included for your reference, particularly those of you who are uninitiated to the process. It was sponsored by NASA, NSF, and NOAA. Actually, NOAA participated, but because of the continuing resolution, they did not fund it in the last survey. It presented a prioritized program of basic and applied research for 2013 through 2022 to advance scientific understanding of the sun, sun-Earth connections, and the origins of space weather, and the sun's interaction with other bodies in the solar system. The recommendations were directed to the study sponsors and to other federal agencies. And you can see in this slide, it included the cost and phasing of the recommended program. Next slide, please. So I'm going to attempt to address a series of frequently asked questions about the survey. I can't go through all of them, but what is going to be new this time around? Better coordination among the sponsoring agencies, especially in developing the statement of task with regards to space weather. And the NSF mid-scale program is likely to receive greater attention. There will be more upfront activities by the sponsors, and the Helio 2050 workshop is a great example of that. And you should expect state of the profession topics in the statement of task. The survey will probably not get underway any earlier than December of 2021. As of today, the statement of task is in draft form only, and the academies can, the academies must approve this study before it can begin, and the contracts have to be signed by the sponsors. So there will be some special forums for early career scientists to introduce the survey to a wider audience and to aid in the solicitation of white papers. And I'd like to address the question asked in the previous panel to say it's very important to submit white papers and to collaborate with people who share your ideas. So using some of the forums that we heard about in the previous speakers to help you organize your ideas and articulate them, it's really a very important contribution to the process. Next slide, please. The survey will probably be organized in similar to the previous decadals. That is, there'll be an overall steering committee that will be responsible for the recommendations, and it will be, that steering committee will be supported by panels and working groups. The panel structure will probably be similar to 2013 if you build on the fact that it was similar to 2003. The survey will probably not recommend missions. The 2013 survey prioritized science targets and mapped these to reference designs that could be evaluated for technical feasibility and approximate cost. The survey participants will primarily be identified via community calls for nominations, including self-nominations. We'll also hear from community leaders, relevant parts of the academy and the agencies. The last time in 2013, there were about 100 scientists on various committees and working groups. Steering committees tend to have more experienced members of the community, but it's essential that they have broad perspectives and wear big hats. Next slide, please. So I'll call your attention to bullet 3. What's the best way to get involved? Write a white paper. The details of how to do that will be broadcast ahead of the survey. You already know that. And we already mentioned the 2050 white paper activity and mission concept studies. Next slide, please. So some caveats about how the nomination process for serving on the decadal. All of the authors of white papers are eligible to be considered. The first authors of space mission or ground-based project-focused white papers cannot serve on the steering group or any panel. And PIs of NASA-funded pre-decadal mission concept studies cannot serve on the steering committee or any panel. Next slide, please. I'm going to stop here. As I mentioned, there's lots of backup slides that can tell you about the previous decadal. And I'd like to share that there will be a town hall at AGU that will provide a longer version of what is a decadal. And it may be more specific depending upon the timing of the study approval. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maura. We're going to skip over, unfortunately, Elsayed Talaat from NOAA had to drop off for another conflicting call, but he does have some slides that I'm going to very quickly review for him. If anyone had all the slides that have been presented today will be made available on the VGEM website. So please be sure to look at those. If you have any in particular questions about what Elsayed has here in his slides, please feel free to reach out to Elsayed. So obviously, I'm not Elsayed. I'm not nearly as well versed in this as he is, so I'm not going to attempt to speak to it. I'm sure I'll just mess something up. So I'll leave it here for everyone to look at in the slides. And like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Elsayed directly. So the starting point for NOAA going into the upcoming decadal is the 2025 program of record. So there's the NOAA Space Weather Observing Program of Record, which is the starting point for the National Academy's infrastructure workshop. That includes SWIFO, the new L1 replacement mission, the GOES, Cosmic 2 Gold, and some others. And then there's the big question of what's next for 2030 and beyond. And so NOAA and NESDIS are formulating a space weather observation program with diverse observing requirements that must be made from a diverse range of vantage points. And they're looking for continuity anticipating product improvement. Lots of needs there, from long lead instrumentation, next gen L1 and off axis Earth observing, space weather ground observations, and more. The program formulation is going to initialize a loosely coupled program with several different projects that are a part of that. And of course, NOAA is, as Maura just mentioned, co-sponsoring the upcoming National Academy's Decadal Survey, along with NSF and NASA. And so after that extremely quick run through, we're going to move to Jared Leisner from NASA headquarters. Jared, if you're ready.
Yes, Ian. Quick, can you hear me? Okay, so hello everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I am Jared Leisner. I am a program scientist in the Heliophysics division at NASA headquarters. And you may have seen my name on a number of the Decadal survey preparation emails that have gone out recently. And so that's what I will talk about now. Next slide, please, Ian. So the previous speakers did a very good job about hitting some of the major points about what the decadal is and how it works. So I'm going to not emphasize those in my next few slides, but talk about the motivation and what NASA gets out of it. So you've heard that the Decadal Survey is a principal way that NASA gets technical expertise, scientific expertise from the science community through the national academies. We do partner with the other agencies. And one of the main benefits of the Decadal Survey is that it is a single, coherent, concise document that provides a foundation for our strategy and the strategy of how we can work with the other agencies. I've called out a few bullet points there, and you may recognize them if you look at previous Decadal Survey statements of tasks as really the main tentpoles of any Decadal Survey. If we go to the next slide. So why do we do the Decadal Survey? Congress tells us to. It's actually in law that NASA specifically has to go to the national academies for the Decadal Survey. And the law specifies that we ask them for three things. One, a prioritization of the science to do in the next decade. Two, a technical and cost feasibility of assessed projects. I will note here, I put in almost scare quotes, whenever possible. That's a caveat that people don't recognize enough, but it's very important for the Decadal Survey to give NASA what it needs. We recognize that there are times when you cannot price out the resources necessary for a project, like technology development and demonstration. And those aren't actually required for those types of projects, but a collection of white papers that identify what's necessary in the next decade for completion, and then what's necessary in the next decade for preparation for beyond that would make use of this caveat in the law. As Maura said earlier, we are not looking for specific projects to be recommended. Specific project implementation doesn't leave NASA the flexibility to maximize the science return on the taxpayer's investment. And then the last bullet from the law is decision rules. So if you have more money than you expect, what do you do? If you have less money than you expect, what do you do? If another agency executes a project that can enable the science you were planning, what do you do? Those types of things give guidance to the agencies on how we can accommodate the realities that occur in every single decade. I'll go to the next slide. So what do we want out of the next decade, or out of the next decadal? We want a strategy that advances and expands the fields. What did we accomplish the last decade? Where do we need to go? What do we need to complete? What science can we do in the next decade that enables science beyond that? Or looking 20, 30 years in the future, what are our aspirational goals and what do we need to start now? Those components of a science strategy are necessary for the agencies, especially NASA with our projects, to lay the groundwork to continually move the field forward. Our two big programs that I'm sure you're aware of are the Solar Terrestrial Probes and the Living with a Star programs. As was recommended in the midterm assessment, we looked at those programs and we have reframed them to better distinguish them from one another. Part of that reframing means that the programs need to focus on the science objectives and the science strategy, not just large programs that each program, not large projects that each program will be responsible for. With those projects, the recommendations, because they focus on science objectives and the strategy, they would be able to, they would leave us the flexibility to implement the projects how we are able to and maintain the programs as healthy, continuing, ongoing programs. We do expect a range of mission sizes and a mix of PI-led and directed. So as I mentioned earlier, not just each program does 1 or 2 large missions a decade. If we go to the next slide. So I have a couple of bullets here. You will recognize that these 4 bullets resemble largely the bullets that I had on previous slides. What I wanted to do is call out the main items that we're looking for in this decadal survey and where the community is already thinking about them, whether it was in the midterm assessment, whether it was in other NASM reports that were delivered to the agencies. These are all things that headquarters and the community are on the same page about. We all want the same thing. And now is the time that we can come together and put together that document that provides a strategy for the agencies to work from. Going back to the question, why should people really care about the decadal survey? Why should it be prioritized when everyone has other time constraints and other demands on their energy? The decadal comes around once a decade. And because some of the things, many of the things that we want to do take more than just a 10-year window to complete, we have to get started now. We understand that not everything that we talk about now will be set in stone for 2050, but we have to start now and leave ourselves the flexibility to adjust and change course as the science evolves. And I saw the warning. Next slide, please, Ian. And so this is my last slide. It's just a summary of what we've been doing to support community engagement and preparation. I would say the pre and post workshop discussion groups, we were very happy with how the community came together and really prepared and engaged in Helio 2050. The turnout was fantastic. After Helio 2050, as you heard from some of the other speakers, there was still work to be done, discussions to be conducted. And if anyone wants to participate, especially if anyone wants to lead a group, please engage. Now is the time when people can come together and work on white papers as a group and collectively ease the burden on each other and still provide the input to the national academies that will make a great decadal survey. I would point you to the website in the lower right-hand corner, and we try to keep that updated. I'm going to be making a next update to that webpage with a reference to other reports and other work that's been done in the past that people especially the early career folks that haven't seen those documents or those reports can reference and help use to inform their own white papers. And I will stop there, Ian.
Thank you so much, Jared. And last but not least, we're going to have Lisa Winter giving the NSF agency.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Great. Well, it's really great to be here and to talk to Jem. So could you please go to the next slide? Just to start off, it was great to hear from, Jared and Maura and all of our partners in this process, and also from the community as well. Like, Larry and Legion, it was really nice to hear your thoughts already. So this year, or this decadal, we're actually at NSF going to be expanding beyond just involving geospace, which I think is really great for the community, especially as we're hearing a lot of interest in topics such as comparative magnetospheres with planetary studies. So we're working with our partners in astronomy as well as physics, in particular the plasma physics program and the Office of Polar Programs to work together on the NSF side for the decadal. And what we're looking for from the community is for you to define what the science priorities are. As we've heard, the Heliophysics 2050 was a great kickoff, and there are a lot of great ideas that we've heard there. And those will hopefully be expanded upon in the decadal. We also, something that we haven't heard too much about, we really care at NSF about the infrastructure that's needed to achieve these science goals. And we're definitely looking for input on that in the white paper process, as well as support for the community. So making sure that the people who are doing this research are supported and make up a diverse range of backgrounds. And we want to support this as well. And we're really excited, as Maura said, there's going to be this, this workforce development piece in this next decadal that will be new and really exciting. Next slide, please. I think some of the words are missing here. This is basically just to say that on the science priorities at NSF, we do look to the decadal for advice on what the community would like to see as the science priorities, but we also at NSF have our geospace portfolio review. And in addition, as Jared had mentioned, looking at the other decadals that have come out for astronomy, as well as plasma physics. So we're not bound to just look at the solar and space physics decadal, but we do take community input from a variety of places. And the solar and space physics decadal is obviously very important. And that's why it's so important to get those white papers in so that we know what the community-driven science goals will be and priorities will be. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, the research infrastructure on the ground-based side is very important for us at NSF to know where we want to invest our money for the community. And part of this is the mid-scale research program is very competitive. And so if the community has a need for a large scale, mid-scale, which these projects range from $6 million up to $100 million, then there's a lot of competition. And this competition is across the agency. So as you can see here, the graph is showing the GEO and MPS are actually where most of the proposals are coming in for mid-scale. So it's really important to have a list of what the priorities are from the community so that when these proposals come up, they can be pushed as important priorities for the whole community. So in addition to that, of course, we want to support the next generation of ground-based instrumentation as well. So for GEM, of course, the magnetometers are very important, and we would love to see recommendations regarding these smaller scale, as well as the CubeSat program as well. And this will really help us to define our priorities and into the next decade. Next slide, please. And then extremely important as well, NSF has a mission to support the people who are doing the science and to have an eye towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as broader impacts. All proposals are judged on intellectual merit and broader impacts, and part of that is training the workforce for the next generation. So we would love recommendations from the community on where we are right now and how we can do better. We know that we can do better, and as you can see in the Nature article that's quoted here, there have been no changes in diversity for 40 years in the geosciences. This is not acceptable into the next decade. We want to find ways to change this. And part of that process is making sure that the committee that convenes the Decadal is also diverse. And we've talked with the Academy and our agency partners about that. And we expect to see great things there as well. And we'd love to see recommendations from the community and white papers on how we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. I apologize that the session ran a little bit long, but we really did think it was important to hear all of these presentations from both the Helio 2050 workshop as well as the national academies and the agencies. Unfortunately, because we've run over, we don't have time for open discussion like we were hoping, but the Slack workspace is open. Please feel free to put any questions or comments that you may have in there. If any of the agency representatives are not available in the Slack, we'll make sure that they get the questions, we get the answers up there either later today or later this week. Thank you all. Hopefully this week will provide a great opportunity for the GEM community to talk about the Decadal survey and our preparations. And we'll head now back to Vania, if you want to close us out before we go to the break.
Yes, thank you all for joining, and we will continue these discussions throughout the week. And please join us this afternoon. We have splinter sessions, and then in the evening we have poster sessions. So hope to see you all there. Thank you.